Hi, I'm Brenda Reese, freedom and forgiveness coach, and a person just like you that is learning to navigate life and all of its challenges. I teach a forgiveness process like no other. It's a blend of practical and spiritual forgiveness. This process guides you into knowing how unforgiveness can be keeping you stuck in your relationships, both personally and professionally, and how it prevents you from releasing resentment and finding joy. Each week, I share practical and some not so practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and other people that are on this journey just like us. This is for you if you are ready to turn your pain into peace. Welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast. Welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast. This is a place where we talk not only about forgiveness, yet also about navigating life and relationships. I'm your host, Brenda Reese, and I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest today. Maureen Spielman is the host and founder of Mystical Sisterhood podcast, and she is a transformational life coach. Maureen credits a life-altering diagnosis in 2018 as changing the course of her life. At that time, she delved into a wide array of healing modalities, opened herself up to a new line of work, and committed to understanding herself in a connected and compassionate way. She went on to pursue a variety of coaching programs, and through individual coaching, Maureen supports individuals in discovering their whole, worthy, and authentic selves, which I love. In her podcast, Mystical Sisterhood, Maureen interviews intuitives, healers, and other courageous women on a path of joy and healing. Maureen holds those who come to her, whether it be through individual coaching or her Mystical Sisterhood community, in the highest light. She knows that they are holders of their own wisdom and have the answers deep within themselves. I love that, Maureen. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. I'm really, really thrilled to be here.
Oh my gosh, I loved being on your podcast, and I love just the connection we had together. I'm so glad we met.
Yes, I know, Brenda. I love to see the connections of who comes together.
Yes.
And you came through Alicia Isaac's house, and it was such a delight to have you on. And really, I hadn't yet in forgiveness alone. And so it was so beneficial for the listeners to receive your wisdom and information and insights and guidance. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. And, I would like to know if you would share with our audience this life-altering situation, right? Because most of us go through some sort of life-altering situation, whether it be relationships or health challenges, that changed the course of our lives. And not a lot of people think that they can follow through with that change, of course. And you did. And so would you mind sharing some of that?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Well, as life would have it, I was just, moving right along. I'm married. I have 3 children, and the kids were, I believe in middle school and high school, and it was 2018. And I was coming off the aftermath of losing my own mother and getting back on my feet after that. And kind of, the kids were growing, and I was a stay-at-home mom and ironically, looking in to go at my first coaching foray. I was going to look into being an integrative health coach. I had always had a passion for holistic ways of living. And so I went to sign up for a course. And right at the same time, I received an unexpected diagnosis of breast cancer. I'd gone in for a mammogram, and, they called me back in. And so in May of 2018, I was staring down, this diagnosis and all these decisions that would come to me and that I would have to really, consider and choose what I thought at the time would be the right decisions for my life. And it was a period of time that lasted about a year and a half. And I knew that I would, go ahead and do the surgery, the double mastectomy surgery. I knew I would do that, but I really didn't know what I would do when faced with other decisions. And so at that time, and I'd have to say, like, going into this, and I'm sure listeners can relate to this because so many of us are deep feelers and very introspective. And really, I think that I have a part of me that considers things for maybe like a longer period of time. I need time to consider what's going to be
Yeah.
my next move. And so I remember in that summer as I awaited surgery, and I would really sit with myself a lot on the back porch. And I began to think, okay, which path will I go? I always identified with very holistic. So then the Western medicine was saying do chemotherapy and radiation and surgery and all the things. And I would think to myself, well, that's not me. I can't possibly do those things. And what I realized during the time, one of my big revelations was that I have to put down everything I thought I knew in
Um,
order to kind of get down to ground zero and choose from the new Maureen that was being called forth. So any label or attachment that I had to who I thought I
yeah.
was almost being asked to let's lay all that aside if possible and start again and see if we can be as much in alignment as possible with the choices to come. And that really was, I often think of that period of time, and also the listener knows, just like you said, life can bring us to our knees in many different ways, presenting many different circumstances. It can be a health challenge, or like you said, a relationship, or the loss of a loved one, anything unexpected. It can even be smaller than that. One of my teachers used to say, like, some people are hit over the head by the 2x4, but others, it's the small whisperings that kind of
Right.
awaken us. But it was really a time that I sat with myself a lot, and I began to pull in. And I think this is, down the road with my Mystical Sisterhood podcast. It's part of what I do is kind of like pulling in resources and
Mm.
considerations. And I started to pull in healers I knew, whether it was our dear friend Alicia and
Yeah.
looking at the Akashic records,
Yeah.
or doing something like acupuncture, or consulting my dear friend Valerie, who's been on the podcast, about channeling what kind of information. So it became a time for me where I settled into myself and pulled in my team, sort of. And it was both, our traditional plus complementary or alternative modes.
Yeah.
And it began to almost, I don't know, grow and transform from a new place.
Mm.
And I do believe that my diagnosis was an invitation to look at a lot of long-standing patterns I had within myself
Yeah.
that were not healthy for me anymore. And I know that you are the expert, the, wisdom keeper around forgiveness, but
Yeah.
I had carried a lot of years, I believe, anger, resentment, unresolved childhood patterning. I was bringing those forth. And so that standstill moment in my life as well created an opportunity. And I believe it created an opportunity for more light to come in
Yes.
and to start shining
Yeah.
a light into places that I didn't even know were possible to process through and let go of. Because as you know too, the whole letting go, that's just two words, right?
Right.
But to really learn what that means and to become more self-aware of, with compassion, those parts of me that were still in pain and they were still
Mm.
holding on and they hadn't learned to let go yet. That was my work. I mean, that's a big answer, but that's a lot of in that year and the years that have followed that where the work started. Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. That is such, you know, I wish for more people to look at it that way,
Mm,
to look at it in the sense of what is it here? It's like shining this flashlight, right? It's like health crises can do that for us. Any kind of wake up, I call
mm,
them the wake ups.
mhm,
It sounds to me like you took that and instead of for me, which I'm sure there was a moment of that,
mm,
right? It's like, why is this? But it's like, oh,
mhm,
wait a minute.
mhm, mhm.
So were you
Yeah.
into the mystical before as this was happening, or did this kind of encourage the mystical with
I
you?
think it encouraged the mystical because I always had an attraction to that as well. And when I was introduced, I believe, to what was really the mystical, through Alicia, which was probably 15 years ago, that was brand new language to me. And I think now with the mystical, my relationship with it is because as the years went by and Mystical Sisterhood, the podcast was really just a I felt like it was divine intervention that gave me the name, that allowed me to follow it, that I never was a big podcast listener before that. And I just kind of followed what was being given to me, I believe. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've watched it unfold. So, for those which I believe is probably most not familiar with the podcast, it's about a year and a half old or young. So when I called it Mystical Sisterhood, I don't think I even knew what it was going to become. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of what we look at within Mystical Sisterhood, I always say it's connection to ourselves, one another, and the universe.
Yes.
But that connection to ourself, even if you take that, it's the invisible, it's the unknown, it's the possibly misunderstood because it's not physical and it's not tangible. So I believe that we're all sort of seeking to understand the unknown. And of course, it's not what we learned in school. And so now it's sort of a playground or a perfect time to, I believe there's many more healers coming forth. And I don't know the studies around that, if there's been any, but I just feel like it's becoming more of not popular, but available on social
Available.
media or
Yes.
in the books we see on the shelves or on the podcast names we're
Yes.
seeing. And so that's exciting to me because I know that the work that you and I both share, it's got a real place in the world right now because I believe it's meeting the deep needs of the world. So
Yes.
it's both mystical is fun and magical and joyful to me, and it's very healing, and it's resourceful and it provides resources, and to me it's abundant too, and holding you and a sisterhood in our global communities like that, we're starting to hold each other, I think, in a much
Yeah.
higher way, like in a higher consciousness where we're actually seeing each other for the beauty we bring, and we're here to celebrate one another is how I feel.
Oh, I love that so much. And because it's like, and it's hard to celebrate when we are in the midst of the stories,
Yeah.
when we're in the midst of those patterns and beliefs, like you mentioned, the things that came forth for you to take a look at, it was an invitation and you
Yes.
accepted it.
Hmm.
That allows us to look at each other differently.
It does, it does.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of that kind of call, and how we are being called to a deeper understanding of ourselves. It's
Yeah.
not just you, it's not just me. And I see myself on the journey that I took because when I started on that integrative health coaching, I finished the program
Okay.
and I wanted to actively coach. And yet I didn't feel like it gave me the tools to do so. It was
Mhm.
very surface, and I didn't know I was looking necessarily at the time when I took that program for something deeper, but it didn't yet meet the needs I had to understand things in a different way.
Yeah.
And so then I went on to study. The next one I did was in conscious parenting, which was conscious parenting is very, very interesting because
Hmm.
even if someone were not to have children, this, we're really consciously parenting ourselves and
Absolutely.
going back to those hurt places, those painful
Yes.
places, the ones that are calling out. And then I went on to study for the last 3 years with my teacher, Susie Lula, for soul care coaching. So I love the work of, I think we match up a lot of,
Yep.
being with our emotions, being with our inner child, reparenting
Yes.
ourselves, bringing compassion, all the things. And I would say, I say that beginning statement of like, if there's a part of you that is that seeker part, and you take that one step forward and you're like, it's not, I want more, I want deeper, keep on following it because I believe that the universe will put the exact right things in your path, and something said on a podcast or you run across a book at the library or whatever it is, but it's gonna pop out at you and be here to support you.
Well, absolutely, because you're open to it. When we start to question, that's an invitation.
Mhm.
Like you
Mhm.
did. It's like, wait a second, hold on. When you sit with yourself, and I think that's what I learned from you. You said I started sitting with myself more.
Mm. Mhm.
Okay. We're busy people. You have
Yeah.
kids, you have a husband, you have the life. And that's one thing that we're being called to do. Don't you feel that? It's like we're being called to sit with ourselves a little bit more
Mhm.
because we keep asking the questions, who am I? What am I
Mhm.
here for? And it's not going to show up if we're not open to receive it.
That's right. It's such a good
Right.
point. I love that.
And
Mhm.
that's what you did. You provided the opening by finally, I always say that my spirit guides, my angels are like going, finally, she's sitting
Yeah.
down. Finally. There's a
Yes.
space.
Right. And it's the practice. It's the again, and I have all these different just beautiful guests come on the podcast, and then I'm reminded and I'll pick up a practice, and I'm not one to make that ritualistic of every day, because when I talk to someone, Brenda, about tapping into the spirit guide and angels, then it's like remind myself again, remind myself. And
Yeah.
then I'll I'll be with it for 5 or 6 or 7 days, and then I'll kind of go to another direction. But I think we all have the different sort of blend of what works for us, and that's truly what it becomes too. It becomes that alchemy or that blend of
Yeah.
what's particular for you. And yours is you're going to have overlap with me, but it's going to
Yeah.
also going to look wildly different.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
giving ourselves permission for that and not
Mhm.
judging. It's like that's what
Yeah.
we do. We're here to try, like the seeker is to
Yes.
seek out these things
Yes.
and to see what resonates and what doesn't.
Mhm.
And so, how do you help people in your coaching? What is it that you
Mm.
love to help people with?
Well, it's interesting in my coaching because I will have people come, sometimes they'll come through that parenting portal and say, I'd like to work on my parenting. Sometimes it will be someone who's at midlife and wanting to begin something new, possibly
Mm.
work on their creativity and start a new hobby or business, or then it can be someone with a relationship. And I find that it all converges into one.
Yeah.
And usually, I'm sure you find this as well, but it all converges into it's usually the woman in front of me and looking at the pieces of our lives that we don't yet understand. I would say a big cornerstone of the work that I love is there's always, it's always held within a principle of spiritual psychology that I was trained in, which is sort of a marrying of Western psychology and Eastern philosophy,
Mm.
but really held in this you are being held by a benevolent universe, a
Mm.
friendly universe. And, that's one of the most compelling things that we can believe in is that it is here for us, despite what we might be handling challenged by in our own lives, that's there to fall back on. But that's not typically where I start. I think really that understanding of our emotional
Mm.
messenger system, our emotions, because I think that a lot of us well, probably most of us didn't really learn about emotions in our childhood, and so many either acted out or acted inward and suppressed. I was more of I believe, a suppressor for much of my life until I got to like my middle school, high school years, and then I would act out. So, and it was really, I think the work now that I help women with is that okay, let's take a look at the emotions. What's coming up for you? That they're all friendly. They're all here for you. There's no bad ones. There's not good ones. It's not a dualistic emotional scale. Some, I believe, are denser than others, but
Yeah.
usually beneath the emotion that's being expressed is an unmet need. If
Yeah.
there's anger or sadness or resentment, what's underneath that? What's the unmet need? And I think for many as well, we might go into it not even knowing what our needs are. And
Right.
so understanding and kind of pulling apart what are my needs? Am I needing to be more expressed? Am I needing more self-care and downtime? But I think, one thing we talked before we recorded is, am I needing self-compassion? Am
Yes.
and within this, you and I were talking about this concept of unconditional self-regard.
Yes.
And the way I think about that is for me, setting an intention around the consciousness within that I'm intending to create, putting intention into, is one of non judgment, no shaming, no criticizing, in becoming the kindest
Oh,
responder to my needs that I can be. And it's a process of learning to come with compassion and a willingness to say, I want to come to myself with that unconditional self-regard. There's no conditions that I am going to put on it. There's nothing I need to be. There's nothing I need to do. You and I mentioned shoulds. There's
Yeah.
nothing I should do in
Right.
order, because we're also conditioned to be the certain ways, and it's the unraveling of all the layers that we learned that I don't know about you, but I just so often think like it's no surprise that the unlayering and the unraveling takes as long as it does, because all the years we spent in our homes of origin, in our schools of origin,
Yes.
every year that we heard the messages, even in one day. And that to really unravel those things
Yes.
takes a while. So I feel like with that, understanding our emotions, going back to ourselves in the places that had hurt and we carried shame around, to go to those places to understand them more deeply. And just step by step, little by little, we begin to feel lighter, to feel like we
Hmm.
might be able to have that conversation, to voice ourselves or express ourselves in a new way. And I always find it really interesting too, that the things that were difficult for us earlier in our life are the things that we're meant to really do the work with. I
Yeah.
think I was told as a young one, I remember the pictures of sitting on my mother's lap and they would say, "Oh, Maureen, she's so quiet. She's so quiet." And I always had that put upon myself. And so
Yeah.
emerging from that has taken my lifetime so far. And I always think it's kind of ironic because the podcast, in a way, or being with you today, absolutely allows me to use my voice as
Yes.
a vehicle for the healing that I probably needed and the healing that I see needed in the world. But also, it's still my work. And if I look at myself in my personal relationships, that's where it shows up. You know?
Oh, yeah.
So I think that I laugh sometimes because I think like someone might look at me and be like, she seems quite expressive, or that she's able to communicate. But it's always in our personal relationships. It's that relationship with ourselves, but our personal relationships where the stuff comes up, and I'm a work in progress. Let's just put it that way.
We all are. And it was so
Yeah.
funny because you remind me of, because we do have lifetime work. So
Hmm.
we think we never arrive.
Right.
And so I remember years ago having a mentor tell me, she said, "Honey, this is a lifelong process." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." You know, and it's like, "Yeah, but, I'm going to get there like
Hmm.
soon." And she said, "No, no, no, honey, lifelong.
Yeah.
Like your beliefs and patterns, they stay with you. It gets
Yes.
better. It
Yes.
gets better. You learn to recognize them different." She goes, "But this is lifelong, like until death."
Yes.
And I'm like,
Oh
"Oh,
my. Yeah.
crap.
By
Oh,
design,
no,
right?
by design." And
Mhm.
it's like, "Well, sweetheart, you chose this." And it's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, let's talk about that, shall we?"
Right. Right.
You know?
Yes. Yeah.
Because different belief systems, but still I believe that. Then it was like, okay, because I can see the progression,
Mhm.
the patterns, and you're not kidding. Personal relationships are
Mhm.
our greatest
Mhm.
teachers.
Yes. For
If
sure.
we're willing to, and it takes a little while to get there, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen overnight, but
Mhm.
it shows up. Like I was just talking to somebody earlier today. Our inner world is reflected outside of us because the biggest part for me is mirroring and
Yes.
projection, right?
Yes.
So if we choose to believe this, if we're willing to look at it this way,
Mhm.
that every relationship I have is for healing and growth,
Mhm.
then what I'm denying, repressing about myself is being projected like a little camera outside
Mhm.
of me so
Uh-huh.
that I could see. Because, like you talked about earlier, the things in our childhood that we learned to not
Mhm.
deal with, that unmet need, the
Mhm.
anger, the resentment, the shame, the guilt, the unmet stuff is under
Mhm.
there. There's in those boxes that we haven't opened up yet.
Yes.
And do
Yes.
you think that sometimes do you have people come to you like you were kind of woken up, I will say, with
Mhm.
a health crisis? And do you think that was like a messenger for to
Mm.
help you look at these things?
I do. I do.
Yeah.
I definitely see it that way. I think the messengers come in all these different packages
Yes.
and forms, and sometimes they are not the ones that we'd ever put that bow on and say, "Oh, I so willingly received this." And
No.
in the moment, it's yeah, it can be so hard, and it's in the rear view mirror, I think, that we see the gift.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I just think the conversation's so great because even what you were just saying about, projection and forgiveness and looking at yourself and looking in the
Yeah.
mirror, because I think when we begin to be curious and open those inner parts of ourselves and say like with compassion and with just so much kindness, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's so understandable that you've had this experience, or Maureen, it's so understandable that you felt that you were living in a sea of, resentment for 15 years. I went to see a channeler, someone who was channeling, she was channeling Abraham Hicks like a
Yeah.
year and a half ago. And it was so comforting to me because she said something like she was talking about our patterns and she was channeling it through. And she said, sometimes it can take I don't even think she said years. I think she said decades. And I was just like, thank you. Because I think also we can be really hard on ourselves about, gosh dang it, you've held on to this pattern, for so long. What's wrong with you? But it's okay. It's okay. And like when she said it that day, I was like, oh, someone sees me. And
Oh,
it felt like we're not always witnessed in those ways if we're not working one on one. So I love what you were saying too, because then on my own experience and my journey, I just I just become, as I put that mirror on myself, I
mhm.
do it with more and more kindness, because I mean, what would you say about that mirror can be put on if we're being harsh with ourselves and we're being unkind to ourselves, then that mirror is not going to be compassionate. Like it's
Right.
not going to have that tone to it yet. But the more we practice and learn those building blocks, then we can do that mirror, and it actually can get quite playful, I believe.
Oh,
Even
yeah.
if it's frustrating,
Oh,
even if we're like,
yeah.
gosh.
Well, that's the other part is the mirror isn't all bad.
Yeah.
The mirror is reflecting like you and I are a reflection of each other.
Mhm.
Alicia, that's where I learned that from. She helped
Mhm.
me see that we are reflections of each other, and because I
Mm.
come in with all the baggage, right? I come in with
Yeah.
the shame and the guilt, and it's
Mhm.
like, oh, sweetheart, honey,
Yeah.
let's look at you are a divine being.
Yeah.
You are so worth loving, and it
Mhm.
was like, what, and learning that mirror is not bad
Mhm.
either,
No.
right? That we can learn. And I love that you use that self-regard. I
Mhm.
just love that because that's a way that we can ease into being kind to
Yeah.
ourselves. Let's regard
Mhm.
ourselves differently.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
Love
love
that.
that. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that
Yeah.
because that is so important.
Yes.
And, we also use these words, letting go.
Mhm.
So I don't know about you, but with clients of mine, it's like they have a hard time letting go. Like this is mine.
Mhm.
This is mine. And as I'm entering this stage of my life, I am in another, learning experience, right? With my husband with dementia and just kind of looking at life differently. And I still have that little pattern showing up, my little codependent pattern that was showing up for me to take
Mhm.
another look at
Mhm.
and finding my voice again, right?
Mhm.
And speaking
Mhm.
my truth. That's my big thing right now is being able to speak my truth with
Yeah.
love. So, what are you finding that you at this stage right now, after what you've gone through, what are you letting go of?
It's a great question. I I think in forming the business part of my work, I've got my business and my personal. I am letting go of that Maureen that felt like her voice was suppressed.
Oh,
And
okay.
that actually might be a good header for me as well, Brenda. Like what is, I think that just came out for a reason,
Yeah.
because my work is an opportunity to express myself, know that, like because I've done the inner work,
Mhm.
that worthiness is there. Like, oh, you're here for a reason. You're here to support.
Mm.
You're here to bring these voices, these ideas, it's really like that balm to
Mm.
humanity, right? That soothing balm to humanity.
Yeah.
So letting go of any old parts of me that didn't feel worthy, that didn't feel enough, that felt that I was lesser than. And so I'd say like those kind of, and those are universal for a lot of us, right? But
Yeah.
I like what you were saying too, like speaking the truth with love.
Yes.
Because I was thinking of an example when you said about the projection. And I'd say, I think with my partner, my primary partner, I've of course healed a lot of things within myself, within the relationship, but it's so easy to project that other person is not enough. And I for a while I would just look in the mirror and I think, and it could be the funniest thing. It could be, people are familiar with this, but it could be a scrap of paper or something that had fallen on the ground. And this
Yeah.
makes, I don't think this is extreme. It might sound extreme, but I would look at it and project that this thing that I was seeing meant that person didn't do enough or
Right.
wasn't enough or
Yeah.
wasn't showing up. Like, I love that word, enough.
Enough.
And then I would turn the mirror on myself because I know the truth of it was, Maureen, where are you feeling not enough? Where are you feeling not enough? And I actually think, that those little examples or questions or ways that we can begin, like along the path, like start using what you talk about and what we're talking about today,
Mhm.
that they help us transform and just emerge as our true self. But you're, just to circle back to that, then take that example. Well, is there also, there's the place to look of, like, Maureen, with compassion, where are you not feeling enough, even
Yeah.
if I don't know the answer, but is there something that you want to say? And
Yes.
I like how you just added with love,
With love.
because that's the practice. Like, where we look at the places in our youth where we didn't hone
Right.
those skills, though that's my work as well. And so letting go, I think it's letting go of those places that didn't believe that my voice was worthy,
Oh,
and replacing the letting go with the emergence of new skills and tools,
yeah.
and paired with that knowingness that my like my truth or what I have to say matters and it's important, because
Oh,
that's been my learning curve too. Yeah.
oh, thank you for that. I think a lot of women can relate to that
Hmm.
too, and probably men. I think the men can relate to that too.
Hmm.
So, as we close our time together, I want to ask, we talk a lot about women supporting each other.
Yeah.
And what do you see as that, as the future,
Mm,
women supporting one another? Because you are bringing that together and you've done it
yeah.
so beautifully. It's our time together, but just knowing what I know about you
Yeah.
and in your mystical sisterhood and the things that you bring forward,
Hmm.
what do you see as the future of women supporting each other? Do you think we can do it?
I think we can do it. I'm so buoyed by what I've seen and have such faith in it, because the mystical sisterhood grew from an idea.
Mhm.
And as of today, because it comes out on our recording day that we have today, 79 episodes, Brenda.
Oh,
And I would say most of them, let's say I've done 10 to 12 or 13, maybe 15. So call that, like 65 other voices coming together. And if you were really to string together the messages and the energy and this
yeah.
idea and vision that we're here to uplift each other in humanity in a new way with a new paradigm, it is absolutely happening. And I think just a few minutes ago when we were talking about, it's become a non-negotiable for me that this is the kind of conversation I want to have.
Yeah.
And I think one of the cornerstones of my, like, reason of being is it's around conscious conversations.
Yes.
And I think people want to listen to conscious conversations
Mhm.
and turn down the volume of the unconscious conversations, because it feeds the soul. And it's what we're, like, craving and yearning for. And so we're doing it. It has begun. We probably have fellow sisters that began this work long
Oh,
ago,
long
but
ago.
now it's really picking up a lot of momentum. So
Yes.
I'm excited by it. And I feel like, with the mystical sister, even sisterhood, and what you're doing is that we're just beginning. We
Yeah.
are just beginning. So that's what excites me. Yeah.
I love that. That just made my heart go pitter patter. It was like, yes, I love it.
Yes.
So, where can people listen to your podcast? How can people get a hold of you? Because I know some people will be very interested.
Oh, thanks, Brenda. Well, on Instagram, I'm at Maureen Spielman. So it's under my name, and I put all my Mystical Sisterhood podcasts there and everything. MaureenSpielman.com is
Great.
my website. And then I'm about to open up my membership again. It's something I laid down for a little bit in order to reimagine, because
Yeah.
I began it when the podcast started, and then I quieted it after a year to really see like what's going on here and bring it to life again. And just this idea of it being a beehive of activity that is very soul fulfilling, that
Mhm.
brings resources, ample, abundant resources, which are really just a reflection of everything we have inside.
Yeah.
And so I would say that, and any groups I have are on my website. And then if
Great.
anyone wants to reach out, it's hello@maureenspielman.com. So
And we
easy.
will have that information in the show
Yes.
notes because
Thanks,
I want
Brenda.
people to reach out to you, and you got to listen to her podcast because it's
Thank you.
phenomenal. You're a beautiful interviewer, and the conversations are just so real,
Thank you.
right? That
Yeah.
that you feel like you're sitting in the room.
And
So,
I just love it because I think there's just so many modalities that are coming. Like I said, like the more light on them, and they're
oh,
coming out. And so you're going to find something that speaks to you. You're going to find the exact right person, the exact right message. And
yes.
yeah, it's fun.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you for taking
Thanks,
the time
Brenda.
today.
Yeah.
And I know this was such a rich conversation. I can't wait to listen to it myself.
Yeah. Thanks, Brenda. It was so fun to be with you.
You're welcome. Talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it, would you do me a favor and share this episode and then follow us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss one episode of the Forgive Yourself podcast, where every Friday you will get tips, tools, and stories so that you can turn your pain into peace. Take care.